Hello, welcome to the Endgame course. I would like to help you understanding and enjoying the endgame part. We'll learn necessary concepts and ideas step by step. This series is about pawn endgames. Are you ready to learn? Let's go and let the orange juice work miracles. This time we will be learning how to win the fixed pawn. In order to do that, we need to know what squares are important to reach. This concept is one of the easiest to understand. Therefore, we'll have another idea how to fight in the pawn endgames. Before we get into the explanations, let's briefly look what we are going to learn this time. First, what are the fixed pawns and why they are so important at the endgame part. Next, how to win the fixed pawn. Another one, how to remember fixed pawn squares. What are the benefits of reaching any of the fixed pawn squares? What are the benefits of having the opposition when the goal is to win or not to lose the fixed pawn? Next, does losing the fixed pawn always mean losing the game? And the last one, what is the relationship between fixed pawn squares and key squares? Which ones are more important and why? Let's get started. First of all, what are the fixed pawns? The fixed pawns are the pawns that are fixing each other on the way to the promotion. As we can see, white pawn is blocking the blacks and blacks is blocking the whites. Therefore, neither pawn can advance. At the same time, fixed pawns show us that as long as there is the obstacle in front of the pawn, it cannot advance. It cannot be a passed pawn, and passed pawn cannot get into the promoting line, getting into the new queen and getting a huge advantage. Therefore, now we know what are the fixed pawns. Now, the next stuff is related to the squares of the pawns that are fixed and the squares that are important, because in a moment we'll see how to win or how to defend against losing the pawn that is the fixed one. And now, at this moment, let's have a look how it looks like. First, we can see that from the white's perspective, white is blocking the black pawn. Therefore, the pawns needs to have some of the specific squares in order to reach them, and we are going to win the pawn. And now, if we are having the black pawn, that is the fixed one, we are just having the squares on the same rank, but the squares are 3 to the left, 3 to the right. First, 3 to the right. 1, 2, 3. These 3 squares are the squares that are very important in order to win the black's pawn. And to the left as well, 1, 2, 3. Therefore, 3 squares to the right and 3 squares to the left. These are the key squares about the fixed pawn, the black's fixed pawn, and if white reaches any of these squares, the black's pawn would be won. And now at this moment, let's check out how it works if black would like to win the white's pawn. And now, again, black is fixing the white pawn, and therefore if black is going to win the white's pawn, there is the same rule. But at this moment, it at the 4th rank with the white's pawn. Therefore, 3 to the left and 3 to the right. And now we can see if black is going to win the pawn, they need to stand in any of the blue squares, and if white wants to win the black's pawn, they need to stand any of the red squares. And therefore, it depends who is going to capture the pawn, either white or black. And now let's have a look what happens at these specific positions. As we already know, if white is fixing the black's pawn, these squares are necessary to reach in order to win the black's pawn by white. And now it is the black's move. And now let's have a look what black should do. Black should use the concept of opposition as we already learned. At this moment, they are in the same line, the odd number of squares between the kings. At the same time, black made the move as the last one, therefore they have the opposition. And now, what the opposition guarantees. As you can see, black is having these squares covered, the same as white is attacking these 3 squares. And now, due to white's move, white is forced to not getting through into any of the squares due to black's blocking the access. And now, if white is getting right, black is doing the same, not allowing to reach any of the squares by the fixed pawn, and therefore white is unable to win the pawn. Therefore, if white gets there again we are having these squares. Very important, white cannot get into the f4 square because it's illegal, but even if they could, theoretically, black would just make the same idea and again having these squares covered, therefore 3 squares that needs to be taken into account. And therefore at this moment, one more time, if we are just having the fixed pawn, white wants to reach any of the squares highlighted red in order to win the pawn. I guess now this is pretty much easy. I guess it's understand as well. Another position, and now this time we can see very similar pawn structure. At this moment the pawns are fixed onto the squares on the 4th and 5th rank, but this time it is black that is trying to win white's pawn. And due to white's pawn being fixed by black, the squares that black is fighting for are 3 squares from the fixed pawn. This time the white one, 3 to the right, 3 to the left. And now it's white. White cannot allow black to infiltrate in any of these squares highlighted with blue. And that's why if black is trying to advance, white needs to stop infiltration. But what happens if it is white who is trying to advance? What happens then? Now we can see that black is going to win black's fixed pawn, and therefore they need to get into the one of the squares by the king. And now it is black, and black needs to give ground or allow white's king to infiltrate, either getting into the right or left. If black is getting to the left, you can see that immediately the pawn is captured, and if black is getting the other way, let's have a look. Now one of the squares of the fixed pawn can be reached by white's king. Therefore white's king reaches one of the key squares, and this moment black cannot stay in any of these squares. Therefore let's pretend black is going back, white is going closer. And now at this moment, as we can see, white reached one of the fixed pawn squares, therefore this pawn would be captured very, very soon. And now, if black is going this way, trying to not allow kings to get closer to the pawn, now we have the opposition, this time the vertical opposition, the direct one, and again, as we can see, black needs to give a little bit of ground, step by step, and white is getting closer and closer to the pawn. And now at this moment, as we can see, there is only one square and one move black can defend the pawn. Therefore, after this move, again, we have the opposition, and now very important is that the king cannot protect the pawn from these squares d5 and e6, and therefore white king needs to give ground, and after giving ground, white captures the pawn. And therefore, if black gets there, they capture the pawn. After that, they are just going with the opposition. Take notice, the stuff that we mentioned many times, if the pawn hasn't crossed the half of the board, the key squares of the passed pawn, this time of the passed pawns, are 2 ranks above. And if black has the opposition, white is unable to reach any of the key squares, therefore it's going to be a draw. Now another position. This time we can see the kings on the other side of the board, previously on the right side, now on the left side. And now again, if white wants to win the fixed pawn, they need to see what are the squares they need to reach. In order to capture the black's pawn, the pawn that is the fixed one, but white needs to reach any of these squares highlighted red. And therefore at this moment we can see that white is pretty close to have any of these squares covered. And therefore, if black is on the move, black needs to use the concept of opposition and having all of these 3 squares covered, and therefore white is unable to reach any of them, therefore they cannot capture the black's pawn. And of course, if black gets left, now take notice that black cannot infiltrate due to the square d5 covered by the white pawn, and black is not allowing white to infiltrate any further. And now at this moment, if white is going this way, trying to capture the pawn from the d5 square, black simply uses the opposition, not allowing again to the white king to infiltrate the position. And therefore at this moment, as you can see, white is unable to make a improvement and infiltrate the opponent's camp. Therefore the game will end in a draw easily. Another position, and now we can see pretty similar situation to the previous one. Previously, we had the position that it was black to move. Now it is white. And again, if white wants to win the fixed pawn, black fixed pawn, they need to reach any of the squares highlighted red. And now, at this moment, white uses the concept of opposition. The concept of opposition is having the kings on the same rank or file with the odd number of squares, and whoever has made the move is having the opposition. White made the move as the last one, therefore white possesses the opposition. And now what is the key factor about the opposition? The most important is the fact that black needs to give ground. And giving ground at this moment means that one of the squares of the fixed pawn will be reached. If black gets right, we have again reached one of the key squares, and in a, let's say, moment, just capture the pawn. And again, if black gets here, now it would be super easy because black cannot defend the pawn, and after winning the pawn, it's going to be a draw due to the pawn hasn't crossed the half of the board. And now, if black is trying to get a little bit different, now it doesn't help as well, because after the opposition again, now we can see that black needs to get either up or right. If they get up, we are just going here, attacking the pawn, and after black is protecting pawn from the f6, white is attacking the pawn and not allowing black to have the pawn covered from the square e6. Take notice, e5 is not possible due to the pawn attacking this square. And now after black moves, white captures, black is using the opposition, not allowing to reach any of the key squares of the passed pawn, and therefore it's going to be a draw. And now another position. As we just saw previously, all of the pawns were on the 4th and 5th rank. And therefore, after the capture of the black's pawn, black could draw this position due to the concept of not allowing white to reach any of the key squares of the passed pawn. Let's check it out what happens if we just shift the fixed pawns one rank above. Now, white to play. White to play uses the concept of opposition to win the fixed pawn. In order to do so, white needs to reach any of the key squares of the fixed pawn. And that's why in a moment we can see that this position would be very easily won for white. And now, black needs to give ground. White reaches one of the squares of the fixed pawn. After that, we can see that black is trying to hold, but it is not going to last pretty much. And now at this moment, if black is getting here, white captures the pawn. And now, very important, take notice that the pawn is on the 5th rank, therefore the pawn has already crossed the half of the board. And if the pawn has crossed the half of the board, now the key squares of the passed pawn are the following, just one rank above. Therefore, at this moment, as we can see, white king has already reached one of the key squares of the passed pawn, therefore it's a win position, regardless if black king has the opposition or not. And now, black king has the opposition, but as we just mentioned, white king has already reached one of the key squares of the passed pawn. Therefore, after this one, again, black has the opposition, but after the moving the pawn forward, the king needs to block the pawn, and the pawn gets to the 7th rank without the check, and that's why it guarantees the victory for the stronger side. Black king needs to give ground, leaving the promotion square. Now, white is having the stairway to heaven for the pawn, and next move pawn advance being protected by the king. And that's why at this moment, as we can see, capturing the pawn, that is the fixed pawn, but now after the capture, the white king reaches one of the key squares of the passed pawn, guarantees the win. And the last example, because this topic is pretty simple, I guess, and you probably can understand everything. Now, as you can see, there are the fixed pawns, but the only difference is that the pawns are on the edge of the board. Edge of the board means that the pawns are on the same files as the rooks at the initial position, either on the A files or on the H file. And now at this moment, let's have a look how can we win this pawn, because it is the same rule for any of the pawns regardless of their position. Now as we can see, the key squares of the fixed pawn are the squares that are highlighted blue. After white uses the concept of opposition to win or to reach any of this, we are just having the position that we know that white king is already in the winning position. After getting with the king closer to the pawn, white king has already reached one of the squares of the fixed pawn. It guarantees winning the black pawn. But does it guarantee winning the game? Let's check it out. Now the same idea as previously, but there is the stuff that we mentioned many times. If there is the pawn that is on the edge of the board and black reaches one of these 4 squares, now they can draw the game easily. Therefore, at this moment, white is unable to win if black plays correctly. This would lead just to the stalemate, and therefore the game ends this way. And that's why, if you would like to know if this rule can be applied to the pawns on either of the ranks and either of the files, yes, it can be applied to any of them. But take notice that if the pawns are on the edge of the board, you cannot win because the defending side needs to have one of these 4 squares close to the corner and then can draw easily. Therefore, this is the exception, even though the rule applies, but you cannot win the game independent if you are in front of the pawn or not, independent if you win the opponent's pawn or not. And now time for the conclusions and summary. Let's just say what we have learned already. Now, the first one is that the fixed pawns are the ones which block each other and cannot make any moves towards the promotion rank. This way, they lack the activity and become immobile. Another point is that the fixed pawns are so important at the endgame part because we need to think and figure out the ways how to change them into the passed pawns. We need to remove the obstacle, as otherwise they cannot move forward. The third point is that in order to win the fixed pawn, we need to reach any of the fixed pawn's squares, either on the left or on the right side of the pawn, 3 to the left, 3 to the right. The fourth point is that the simplest way to remember fixed pawn squares is to connect them with the concept of opposition. The pawn can be attacked from both sides of the board, therefore 3 squares on each side of the fixed pawn are the key ones to remember. Next point is related to the fixed pawn squares, that in order to reach any of the fixed pawn squares, you simply win the fixed pawn. It does not always mean you automatically reach the key squares of the passed pawn, unless the pawn crossed the half of the board. Another issue is that the opposition is a very important concept, as it either allows to reach or deny the access to the fixed pawn squares. And that's why both sides fight for the opposition, as it ensures realizing the goal, either losing or defending the pawn, looking from the perspective of the defending side. Another point that is worth mentioning is that losing the fixed pawn does not mean losing the game unless the king reaches any of the passed pawn key squares. Therefore, if the king captures the fixed pawn that crossed the half of the board, it automatically ensures winning. Otherwise, the defending side can draw the endgame using the concept of opposition, not giving access to any of the key squares of the passed pawn. And the last key takeaway is that I want you to remember is that the key squares of the passed pawn are paramount, as reaching any of them means that the pawn promotion is unstoppable. However, reaching any of the fixed pawn squares always means winning the pawn. And as we already know, unless the stronger side reaches any key squares of the passed pawn, they cannot win king and pawn versus king endgame. Okay, I guess it's enough for this time. I hope now you understand the idea about the fixed pawns and the fixed pawn squares, how to fight for these squares and how these squares can help you to win the pawn. And now I guess you understand why it is that much important to have it as another weapon in the fight in the king and pawn endgames. Thank you very much for watching. If you would like to provide some of the comments below the video, it would be great as well. And next time I'll try to show you how all of the rules are we are talking about can be summarized and how they need to be applied into the practical positions. Therefore, in the next video, you will see how of all of these examples and all of the stuff that we already discussed are in the practical situations applied. Thank you very much and see you next time.